Great.
Yeah,
I will just like, no, this one. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much again for the invitation, but let me just like, say something about the project. It was a project that ended in 2019. It was supported by the European Research Council. We had really quite interesting research there, and the last PhD student in the research will defend on Friday next, by the way. So now we have really 2 PhD dissertations, lots of research have been done, edited volumes and things like that. So I will try just to introduce you to bits and pieces of what we have been doing in the last years. Remember this picture very well. The picture you are seeing now, I will not say anything about it, but remember it very, very well. Look at the faces, absorb them in your senses in order to get back a bit to the interwar period and Muslims who were there. These were more or less the elite Muslims who were present in Western Europe. It's a mixture of people. You see there about Tatar, East European Muslims, you see Arabs, you see Europeans, Egyptians, Persians, and you see really a cocktail of many people there. So before I go for this picture, I would like just to tell you something. How did I come across this project? What was the trigger? Many years ago, we are talking about maybe 15 years ago, I was doing my PhD research on Sheikh Muhammad Rashid Rida. Reena definitely knows as one of the big godfathers of Islamism in our time, in the modern time, I mean. So I was doing my PhD on Rashid Rida, and Rashid Rida was very interesting for me for several reasons, because of his magazine, Al-Manar, The Lighthouse, which was really a fascinating mine of information and a gate for the understanding the Muslim world, including also Muslims in Russia, because he had really strong contact with Muslims in Russia. He wrote a lot about Muslims in Russia. So I was interested in him, especially in his perceptions of Christianity. So I wrote my dissertation about his views about Christianity and his contact with Arab Christians of his time. I was very lucky to come across his archive. It was kept in Cairo in the possession of his grandson. His grandson lives now in the United States. And when I stumbled upon this archive, he invited me to go to his house in order to have a look. And I have to thank my brother who is attending the lecture, because he was very small and helping me archiving and scanning the archive. By the way, he is present in the lecture. So anyhow, I came across this archive, and then in the archive, which contains more than 5,000 documents, which I have scanned with the help of my brother, as I have said, this is my lifetime project. I hope that I will just be able to publish it one day. But anyhow, in the archive, I came across 13 letters, which were signed by Dr. Zaki Kiram, Karlstrasse number 10 in Berlin. When you read these certain letters, you find fascinating information. He's telling Rashid Rida about Muslims in Berlin, the mosque, the Ahmadiyya movement, visits of Arab princes, visits of Arab politicians and scholars to his house. So it seems that his contact with Rashid Rida was not only formal, but also informal as friends. But I was wondering, I mean, just like, when I saw these letters, who is this person? What motivates him? Why he ended up in Berlin? And how come that he keeps informing Rashid Rida about the situation of Muslims in Europe and in Berlin? He's also telling him about Rashid Rida, for example, would look for a work about Islam written by a German Orientalist. And this Zaki Kiram would go and buy it and then send Rashid Rida summaries of what is going on, what was written about Islam in Europe. When I looked at the name, I was wondering, is this an Arabic name? Is Persian? Is it Turkish? It can everything. But what is interesting about it, when we write it in Arabic, it does not come that often into Arabic. So I thought, you know what? I will search the telephone directory on the internet. And then I found in whole Germany, 2 people still living with the same family name. one in München, you see there, and one in Kornwestheim, just a small village close to Stuttgart. Then I thought, okay, maybe this one could be. So I picked up my phone. I phoned this gentleman who died 6-7 years ago. And then I asked him, is this the family of Zaki Kiram who lived in Karlstrasse number 10 in Berlin? He said, yes, he was my father. How did you know? I calmed him down and I said to him, I have seen letters by your father in Cairo. Do you know Rashid Rida? Yes, my father used to tell me about him. So we spoke in German because he cannot speak any Arabic anymore. Do you have any archives of your father? He said, yes. Zaki Hishmat Bey Kiram, an Arab officer in the Turkish Ottoman army. He fought in the First World War. You see a picture there, you know, maybe my picture is on it. This is, if you remove my picture just to the other side, you see him with a very, you know, this damaged leg, because he was the commander of the Bedouin troops in Al Arish, Sinai, during the First World War. He was injured, and during the war, he was transferred to Jerusalem. They couldn't help him, and he ended up during the First World War in Berlin, where his left leg was amputated because it was very, very damaged. He married to Gertrude Neundorf, a German lady. From her, he got Harun al-Rashid Zaki Kiram, his son, the son whom I have visited in his village. You go there, you find the archive, fascinating diaries from war times, letters, correspondences, and many, many, many other things. I will come back to that later during my talk, because I could just talk about his biography, but the most important thing to know is that he was born in Syria. He is Syrian by origin. He studied in the Ottoman capital in Istanbul, in the academic and military academy, and from there he participated in the Balkan War, and from the Balkan War to the First War on the German side with the Ottomans, on the German side with the Ottomans, and then he ended up in Berlin. Again, after this journey, I was just like, you know, wondering how interesting this. A network was established around Rashid Rida in Europe. This is something we didn't know before. I mean, just that Rida in Cairo, while Muslims in Berlin and other places of Europe are surrounding among him around Rashid Rida, the same like Muslims in Russia or Muslims in Bosnia or Muslims in China. So he has his network, his worldwide network all over the place because of his global magazine, Al-Manar. Again, I was looking in the journals and all the newspapers, and I found this. Secretary, what you can read there, Secretary al-Jam'iyya al-Islamiyya al-Hollandiyya, the Secretary of the Dutch Islamic Association. And then you read there, this gentleman, an old former Dutch military, visiting Cairo, giving a lecture about Islam and Christianity in Jam'iyyat al-Shubban al-Muslimin, the Association of Young Muslim Young Men. He visited some Sheikh al-Azhar. He converted to Islam in Cairo officially. He was accompanied by some Indonesian students who were studying in Leuven and who accompanied him to Cairo. But again, this is a totally unknown person. We don't know him. We don't know anything about this Jam'iyya Islamiyya, this Islamic association. But I was again lucky to have a very exotic, strange name in Dutch, like Kiram in Arabic. Now we have Van Beten in Dutch. You can understand what will be my trick. Again, the telephone directory. And then this time you find two people also living in the Netherlands with this family name. I found one of them in Oudijk. This is a small village here close to Leiden and Utrecht. And then I found this gentleman. Do you have any archives of your grandfather who was a military, converted to Islam, blah, blah, blah? Yes, come and see. Again, you discover another network in the Netherlands among Indonesian students and the Indonesian workers in Europe in the 20s and 30s. What is very interesting about these pictures, and I will go into details with this, the picture you see with Van Beten, this Dutch man with this book, you see that? This is actually, he is blessing the couple in the municipality of The Hague after their marriage with the Quran, using a Mus'haf, using a Quran. The other picture on the side, on the other side, people people just parading like this. This was a funeral, Muslim funeral ceremony throughout the streets of The Hague. So Muslims, they had their own graveyard, they have their own cemetery, and they could just have their ceremony throughout the streets. The pictures you see above, one in The Hague and the other one with these young men with a tarbush, these are the Indonesian students in Cairo. So he visited them, he lectured them, and he was in good contact with them. So again, after this long introduction and anecdotes, what to do with that when you have such materials? What should we do with that? Then I thought, let's put it in a wider framework. And this framework we can call the transcultural or the global history. And why is that? Because after the First World War, there was an increasing awareness of global connectivity. So the idea of the East and West from the 19th century on, it has become, it has its internationalist, global, transnational connectivity. The First World War was a trigger to remove all these things and the idea of border crossing, entanglement. And then now what we are talking about, the Van Bentem, the Kiram, Rashid Rida, all those people who are talking about Western and non-Western memories together. And if we sift out and study these archives and put them in the right perspective, I was thinking that we could create new cultural and religious impact zones. But why Muslims and Islam in Europe? I think we are dealing here with individuals, networks, agency. We have seen this in the archive. Our impression while working in this project, that there are some studies. We are not the first ones who study Islam in Europe. No, there are some studies and also many studies before the project. But most of these studies were looking at Muslims in interwar Europe as part of colonial history. They are outside there. So they are studying colonial history and connecting these Muslims just to colonial history. Nobody has ever looked at them as part and parcel of European history, or just there are some colleagues who did that, but the project was just focusing, strengthening, highlighting this focus that they are part and parcel of Europe. They are adapting themselves to Europe. They are building mosques in Europe. They have their conferences in Europe. So now we have tried to study them as entangled part and entangled the history of Europe. And the hypothesis was the following, and I think we have succeeded in making this hypothesis true. And this was also the title of the project, neither simply visitors nor colonial victims, but engaging actors with the global. I will explain this just in a minute on the basis of some case studies. I have mentioned the cultural and religious zones. We have also this cultural and religious transfer we see in Europe, and we are dealing with transcultural biographies like Kiram in Berlin, Van Bentem in the Netherlands. These are transcultural biographies, people who went beyond their culture, their original culture, in order to adopt and adapt themselves to other cultures, in this case, the Islamic culture. We believed that studying this project, pushing forward the focus in that direction, we may create new insights. What do we see here actually? What you see here is a document from the French intelligence service from the early 1930s, following Moroccan nationalism. I hope that, yeah. What you see there, above this red, what I have said in red, this is Shakib Arsalan. There in this square, you see the name Shakib Arsalan. Shakib Arsalan was a Lebanese prince from Druze origin. He was exiled in Europe from 1925 to 1946, before his death, a few months before his death. He lived his exile in Geneva, in Switzerland. And Prince Shakib Arsalan, for more than 20 years, he changed Geneva to be the center of the Muslim world. People say about Shakib Arsalan that he was a statesman without states. Others say, I mean, just he himself said, he used to write about 1,200 letters a year. We are talking about 15 letters a day, traveling all over the place, even to Russia. He visited Moscow, Muslims in Moscow. He had good connections with Muslims in Bosnia. Shakib Arsalan was a celebrity in his time, a global character. He was a friend of Rashid Rida, remember that. Remember Rashid Rida, he was a good friend of his, and he was also a friend of Zaki Kiram, and he knew Van Baten in the Netherlands. So now the network, our network starts now to connect to each other. But what is interesting about this political document I'm showing you here, that Shakib Arsalan, the French intelligence service, was putting him in the center of the network. You see him there from Geneva. The strings of the network expands to where? To Madrid, to London, to Paris, to Morocco, to Egypt, to Syria, Palestine, Vienna, and Amsterdam. You see it there with Muslims living in themselves. So you see here, this is just like, you know, the Islamist, communist, nationalist networks around Shakib Arsalan. Shakib Arsalan in the middle of it. So the French intelligence service is explaining for us historically what was going on, what we see in the documents, what we see in the correspondences is here, although it's a political document and you have to deal with it carefully, but it sketches for us the way we see it and we could perceive it historically. But if we change it to what we have discovered, the French were mainly interested in North Africa and their colony in protectorate in Syria. But now if you look at Shakib Arsalan in the middle, I've just said we have seen him, you see that he has connection with Rashid Rida in Egypt, with Kiram in Berlin, with Van Baten in Amsterdam, and two Muslims in Russia and Bosnia. You see there. Two Muslims in the United States because he traveled to New York and he also had contact with many people. He wrote in all Arab press. I can assure you every day you have an article of somebody like Shakib Arsalan. He has his own magazine in Geneva, La Nation Arabe, which he published in French in order to mobilize the European, you know, public opinion against the colonization of the Muslim world. So now we are dealing with overlapping networks. And these are the case studies I would like to discuss with you just, and then I will come to a conclusion and then we can open the discussion and I will be happy to receive questions from you. We are dealing with political, socio-political network. You have also cultural and you have religious. And I will explain this in a minute. This we have seen, just like, you know, it's good to see it now in comparison with this document I have just explained to you. And then we will look at these networks as not outside there, but inside here. I mean here in Europe, with the idea of collective action, parallel histories, transcultural history, Histoire croisée. You can just like, you know, apply many conceptual frameworks to the things you are studying. Do you remember the picture we had in the beginning in a small version? Yeah. This is actually what we see here is the European Muslim Congress in Geneva, which was established in 1935. By whom? In the middle, Prince Shakib Arsalan, we have seen. He was the main mastermind behind this conference. Who else? There, Charles Mohammed Ali van Baten, representing the Dutch Muslims in the Congress. What is interesting about these two pictures, the picture I have shown you in the beginning and this picture, is that the two pictures, very unique pictures, I have discovered in the archive of Charles Mohammed Ali van Baten. Before I discovered this archive, we never had a picture of the Congress. We know much information about the conference, who are there, lists of names, you know, their activities, their talks, but we have never seen a picture. And can you imagine that you have two important pictures for the history of Muslims in interwar Europe in a family archive in a small village in the Netherlands? And I remember when the grandson of Muhammad Ali van Baten came to my office when I was working in Leiden, and he was showing me the pictures of these Indonesian people in The Hague. And this, when I have seen this picture, I screamed. Really, I screamed. I shouted, Geneva 1935. And the gentleman looked at me and they said, who is this crazy historian? I said to him, this is the European Congress in Geneva. This is your grandfather. This is Prince Shakib Arsalan. This is in the middle with this, turban. This is the Mufti of Yugoslavia, Mufti of Poland, sorry. The Mufti of Poland was there. And Shakib Arsalan invited Muslims from Eastern Europe and from Russia. Why? Because they are the European Muslims. They could help Muslims integrate in Western Europe. The reason behind the conference was not ultimately political, because the Swiss government was very, very, careful about that. They have advised Muslims not to talk about politics in order not to provoke the British or the French sentiments against them. Therefore, Shakib Arsalan was just pressing on the participants to talk only about the situation of Muslims in Europe. They aimed at establishing schools, mosques, to lobby, to have just like, their social, political activities, how to organize themselves, how to profit also from Eastern Europe, about their experience of integrating in European culture. So the conference actually had students, women, diplomats, European converts, activists, exiles, ex-militaries, intellectuals. It was a combination of many Muslims from all strata in order to help, establishing Islam in Europe. For sure, we are talking now about 35. The Second World War was triggered 3 years later, and all the hopes of integrating in Europe and living in Europe has been scattered due to the Second World War. And do you remember Zaki Kiram? Now we will come to connect the network together. The friend of Rashid Rida. You see him here with his wife. If you just remove the picture somewhere, you could see his wife, Gertrude Neuendorf, standing there. And he is in the balcony there. And then he is here welcoming and receiving Prince Faisal of Saudi Arabia, who was later the king of Saudi Arabia, coming from Amsterdam. This is the KLM. What you see there, the aeroplane is KLM, coming from Amsterdam in order to establish political and economic relationships with European governments. Zaki Kiram took part in that. He was a translator, interpreter, and also accompanying those people. The most important thing he participated in is arms deals, weapons, because he is an ex-military. He was used by Arab leaders in order to negotiate with the German governments and arms fabrics in order to introduce German arms to the Arab world. The most important participation in that or share in that was in Yemen. And what you see there, these two documents with this beautiful red stamp. This is a stamp of Al-Hukuma Al-Mutawakkiliyya, the Yemeni government during Imam Yahya of Yemen. So there are in the archive, there are hundreds of these letters signed by the Yemeni government regarding arms deals. What you see down there with this other letter, not with the red stamp, but the other letter, this is the handwriting of Imam Yahya of Yemen with his son signature, Muhammad Amir al-Mu'mineen. So it was a letter to Zaki Kiram in Berlin with the handwritings of the king. He traveled to Yemen 3 times in 31, 34, 36 in order to help the Germans, establish these arms deals. You should not be surprised that the deals at this time went this way, because informal networks for arms weapons between Germany and the Arab world was the norm. It was very normal. It was secret, but it was normal. And once an English traveler has said, when you see a German in Yemen, in Sana'a, it is either he has a music gramophone, music number, a new music number, or dealing in weapons with the Imam. So this is actually one of the anecdotes. It's just like normal. You see Germans, Italians, probably also Russians, British, all those people, just like, and Imam Yahya was much interested in second-hand weapons. Yeah, so he was interested in second-hand weapons. Zaki Kiram traveled there. One anecdote, and then I will move to the other networks. One of the interesting things about Kiram, once I met a Yemeni colleague and I was talking about Zaki Kiram, Imam Yahya, and talking about the Yemeni history, and then he told me, but Imam Zaki Kiram, is this a human being? I said, yes. He said, no, This is the name of the Mauser rival. The Mauser rival in Yemen is called Zaki Kiram. So if you tell any Yemeni average, I would like to have one Zaki Kiram, they know exactly what you mean. It's just a short Mauser rival. Then I went, interestingly, for ethnographic reason, I wanted to search for Kiram in the Yemeni perception in novels. For example, when you read Yemeni novels, you find a dialogue, just a man telling another man, I will go to the market and bring one Kiram and kill them all. So it's even in novels. It's also integrated in folklores. A song in Yemeni would say, your love has hit heart like Zaki Kiram would hit the enemy, something like that, you know. So now he just like his name is still really in the consciousness, the historical military consciousness of Yemen up till now. You see, when I shared some of these documents in Facebook, my colleagues in Yemen, historians, they really did some. One of them just like, you know, has said, this is the Zaki Kiram of my grandfather on the wall, just sending me a picture of a Zaki Kiram in their house. So this is actually about this you know, political military network. Now we come now to some cultural aspects. Those Muslims living in Europe were also writing in Arab newspapers. What you see here, there are two articles written by a Moroccan student in Bonn, Taqi Din al-Hilali, who is very important among Salafi circles at the moment. He studied his PhD in Berlin, in Bonn, and later in Berlin. And from there, he was writing to Arab newspapers about his experience in the West. This is Al-Fath magazine. It's a sister of Al-Manar of Rashid Rida we have talked about. And he was talking here, he was writing, for example, if you see there, النفس الإفرنجية أهل أوروبا والتدين. He is now claiming a first-hand experience with Europe. He is telling the Arab readers, I'm here to tell you about Europe. One thing, Irina, maybe this is what I meant from the beginning of my lecture. Al-Fath magazine, Hassan al-Banna was a celebrity in this magazine, as you know. So he was really writing in this side by side. Shakib Arsalan was writing there. Taqi Din al-Hilali was writing there. Hassan al-Banna was writing there. What is interesting about the Muslim Brotherhood, although Rashid Rida's influence is great, they are nowhere mentioned in Al-Manar. Neither Hassan al-Banna nor the Muslim Brotherhood, but they are mentioned here in Al-Fath magazine. They are participating here. So you see that Muslims writing about Europe in Al-Fath in the 30s and 40s, side by side, where Hassan al-Banna is writing about his movement. You know, so this is what I meant actually was a kind of prelude to this mixture of ideas and mixture of ideologies in the 20s and 30s. So those Muslims claimed that they could, just like, you know, they claim a first-hand experience by which they could, help Muslims understand what Europe is. The religious networks, and here we should pay special attention to the Ahmadiyya movement, the Lahore Ahmadiyya, and later also the Qadianis. But the Ahmadiyya, they established mosques, they established magazines. You see there, this is actually the mosque you see there. This is Taj Mahal, a small Taj Mahal in Berlin. And it's still now, you can visit this mosque in Berlin. It's still an Ahmadiyya mosque, and it was established in 1925. In 1914, they have established the Walking Mosque in London. And then you have another French project in the Great Mosque in Paris, was established by the French government for Moroccans and North Africans. But anyhow, the Ahmadiyya were the most important and most active part in, or just like, you know, Muslims, active Muslims in Europe at this time. They have established the Muslimish Review, what you see there in German, and the Islamic Review in London. And there they have just like, you know, talked about Islam, philosophy, modernity, Goethe. In the French things, they were just comparing Goethe to the Prophet Muhammad, having that Islam is a religion of philosophy. By this, they adopted some Protestant missionary methods in order to show Islam as a modern European, just like compatible with European values and philosophy. And this is what they were doing. It was just a kind of laboratory of modernity. So these mosques and these small centers, from there, the Ahmadiyya wanted to propagate Islam. They win over many converts. So you see many converts in London and in Berlin in particular. They were intellectual Europeans. Some of them were noble, also from Baron families. And these were the face of Islam in Europe at this time. Now, this is actually some of the religious networks. And then I will come to conclusion. And then we can open the discussion again. I think, Irena, you are smiling because of this picture. You see Hassan al-Banna on this side, and then Tariq Ramadan on the other side. I don't claim that we have this link, but I would like, just like, you know, to understand what was going on in the interwar period and what we have now, the idea of European Islam. I think the project can participate in the current debates about Islam and Europe and the world of Islam. We have tried to establish this missing link. The 19th century Muslim students, the war came, there is an interwar period, which also is fascinating for Europeans themselves. And then after this, you have the guest workers in the 60s and 70s. And I think throughout the decennia from 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, our project is participating to fill in this missing link and this gap. We can talk about early Muslim activism in Europe. We have seen mosques, we have seen magazines, we have seen conferences, we have seen arms deals, we have seen just lots of things. So we have seen intellectual history, political history, social history, etc., etc. I think it's also, it can be not only in the field of Islam, but also in the field of European history. So it fills just a small, very tiny, small gap. Maybe a few thousand Muslims lived in Europe, but it also reflected about on the European history. Is it a European Islam? This is a very good question, but I think if we compare Eastern Europe to Western Europe, we can see if it is really European Islam. What kind of that? Is it just like, you know, a religion combined with European values? This is also some of the things we have been dealing with. We are talking about really about roots of Islamist ideologies in Europe, and we have tried to generate a frontier in the pre-migration, pre-integration experience of Muslims in Europe. And I will stop here, and I will be very, very happy if I could receive some. Thank you so much.